Every now and then, Football Manager feels a little bit dull. Sometimes I get tired of playing with awful teams that simply can't do anything right. I feel this the strongest when I run into players that just don't want to stay at my club. It makes me wish I could coach some good players for a change. You know, players like Lothar Matthäus or Karl-Heinz Rummenigge.
Michael Rummenigge und Karl-Heinz Rummenigge das 1:0.
And then, of course, there are guys like Pelé. Well, I guess it's my lucky day. I mean, there's not just one database of legendary players for Football Manager 2024. Now, I was able to find 5 of them. They're all different. Well, I think they're all different. Anyway, before you download them and you fire them up for yourself for your final save of FM24, let me show you what they do differently so you can know beforehand. And I've included links in the description to all 5 so you can see for yourself. Now, the first database I'm going to talk about was featured by Clates in a video a few months back. I've included a link to that video in the description of this one. It comes from this Reddit post, which I'm guessing most of you missed. Don't worry, I missed it too. Now, the first thing to know about this database is that it uses the World Super League file by Darth Furion as a base. I know that file really well. In fact, I use it all the time. It's my favorite add-on. This file uses the public edition of Darth Furion's work, and it's a save game, which means that you have to accept the structure and you can make no changes. I'm not certain which database these great players come from, or if this poster decided to create them by himself. I suspect that these come from a different existing database, however. But one of the problems with this database is that most teams are filled with grayed out players. In other words, while he was creating the data for this save file, this Redditor decided to delete a ton of players for no apparent reason. Now, I don't see that anybody called the creator out for deleting players, which actually kind of surprises me. And it's possible I might just be seeing things. Maybe things would be different if I went through and played out a whole career. Anyway, you can check it out and decide for yourself. The next file comes from this FM Scout post, the Football Legends database. Now, the description here is pretty nicely written and well formatted. However, if you read it carefully, you'll realize that it was written using none other than ChatGPT. Now, I should say something here. I really don't have a problem with people using ChatGPT to translate. In fact, most Football Manager players talk with each other in English, even if they're from various different countries. I'd rather see you use AI to translate what you want to say accurately than say something that's impossible to understand. But still, it kind of amuses me to see that this is clearly written by AI. There are 2 save files here, one with transfers on, the other with transfers off for the first season. You'll notice right away that there are only 5 countries and a limited number of leagues. Also, all the top level leagues have a limited number of teams, which is a little bit surprising. And as you can see here, some of these teams have a ton of players, like Manchester United. Now, the structure of the league seems to be copied from the vanilla database for the most part, with no major changes. And that's really about as much as I can see without having the original editor data file. In fact, I'm not the only one to notice this. Others are also asking for a version of the database to make a few adjustments, or at least to see what has been done. Now, if you look closer at the description, you'll see that he did talk about modifying the league rules, such as going back to 2 points for a win. And then there's this really cryptic promise of an enhanced supporter version, but there's no link anywhere. Anyway, I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but at least it's another option for you. Now, we'll next go to a database that I'm really familiar with. Unfortunately, though, I don't think that the photo pack is still available for it. This is the Legends of the Beautiful Game database by Azam Al-Afghani. I've enjoyed playing around with this database for the last couple of years, in part because of the excellent method that Azam uses to choose player ages. Now, if you start playing around with this in the pregame editor, you'll notice some odd things. For example, some included players now exist in the database both as players and as retired people. You'll also notice that some of the teams are overloaded with players, such as Manchester United with a whopping 34 on the first team, and that doesn't count the numerous wonder kids on the under-21s. I've played with this database a number of times in a number of different scenarios, and I can tell you that it does some pretty crazy things to the transfer market. You see, the problem is that you wind up with great players that simply don't play very many games because of the raw ability of the legends that are in front of them. This is an issue actually with every single one of these databases, and we'll talk about that in a second. Based on this pastebin document on Azam's Twitter page, I think there are about 1,400 players included in this database. Unfortunately though, the facepack seems to be down, and I'm not sure that Azam is still updating this. It's still a fun database to mess around with though. However, you might want to go in first and do something to reduce the squad sizes. Now, next up is a much smaller database, but one that's probably a little bit more manageable. This one is a little bit older, and I think the author is still working on the facepack. Now, this database is pretty much like the ones we've seen so far, with players starting out at a certain age based largely on when they actually played in real life. The cool thing, of course, is that the author has broken down the legendary players by country in his forum post to make it easier to see who he's included. If you look closely at the file, you'll notice that a lot of the legends are a long way from their potential ability. This means that you've got a lot more flexibility in influencing how the players will turn out. Anyway, after taking a peek inside, I didn't see a lot that was different from the Legends of the Beautiful Games, aside from having fewer new players overall. But you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing, and the author is still updating his database. That's one to watch for sure. And now let's move over to the most recently created database, the one that we've all been waiting for. This one comes from Fenech, and I'm hoping I'm saying his name right. As you can see, he's only put about 10,000 hours into creating this. Based on what I've seen, it seems that he's made changes to a little over 3,000 existing players and staff members, which is really impressive. Tony Fenech is well known in the FM community for his Ultimate Legends database way back in 2016. I know that several versions of this were released and that the community worked on this together for several months. Unfortunately, it seems the only way to get a copy of that old database these days is by sending him a private message. Now, this updated version was first announced over a year ago, and there was a lot of hype even then. There was a ton of hype around the release of this one, something that was kind of fun to watch. Anyway, as you can see, it's absolutely a database of super players with tons of players with current abilities and potential abilities in the 180s and higher. The squad sizes are also a little more in line with what I would expect from a normal team, though I'm not sure where all the other players went. Now, one thing I will say is that too many of the legends I looked at were model citizens. I know some of these players absolutely were model citizens in real life, but I'm kind of having a hard time seeing how Trevor Francis should be characterized as a model citizen, for example. And there's another problem that every single one of these databases faces, something that you usually don't think about when you're creating your own players for Football Manager. I'll put it to you this way, there are 144 players in the normal Football Manager database with a potential ability of 170 or over. There are also a couple of players with minus 95 potential ability, which is basically the same range. Now, if you look at the Fenech database, you'll see the problem I'm talking about. In fact, now there are hundreds of players with a potential ability of 180 or more. We're talking about like 5, 6, or 7 times more than in the vanilla database. Amazingly, 111 players have a potential ability of over 190. This absolutely can have an impact on your save. So for one thing, teams that don't have the super players are going to be at a huge disadvantage. Good luck trying to get your Youth Academy challenge to work. That creates a challenge, that's for sure. However, the influx of players with unlimited potential also risks creating an imbalance in the game. And I've seen this before as I've played with these kind of databases. You wind up with a bizarre transfer market when teams realize that they've got too many Wonder Kids. You also wind up with a massive gap between the teams with numerous Superstar Wonder Kids and the teams that don't have any players like that for whatever reason. Say, for example, the team was formed in like 2015. Now, this is not necessarily the end of the world. And the truth is that it's kind of hard to deliberately nerf the great players to get them to fit into the overall system. But keep this in mind before you jump into your save. Well, I'm going to go through a project using this setup just to see what happens, but I'm also probably going to give my own team a few small advantages to make up for the gap in competition. I'll keep you guys updated on what happens. Meanwhile, let me know down below what you think about these databases, which ones you like, which ones you don't, and so on. And remember to check them out at the links in the description.